It goes without saying that war is bloody, and this was just as true in the Star Wars universe as in reality. The Clone Wars in particular were extremely bloody, and depictions of that conflict rarely shied away from that fact. But in war, casualties don't always mean deaths, and in fact, the wounded typically outnumber the dead in all but the worst of massacres. This was true in the Clone Wars as well. Many clones were wounded, but not killed in battle, and as a result, medical units were necessary as part of the Grand Army of the Republic. The Republic Mobile Surgical Units, or RIMSUs for short, were the unsung heroes of the field, and in this video, we'll be giving these units the spotlight they deserve.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
In any given battle of the Clone Wars, there were many ways for a soldier to get hurt. Blaster bolts, of course, were the most obvious hazard, but there was also shrapnel, unchecked fires, concussive force from explosions, fumes and other debris clogging the air, environmental hazards, and much more to worry about. The Republic's clone troopers wore armor primarily to mitigate these secondary concerns so clones could focus on the blaster bolts, but that armor wasn't perfect, and there were still plenty of ways for clones to get wounded. A lot of the time, these hazards proved deadly, as you'd expect, but it's when they didn't that things got messy. The human body is quite complicated, and the extent and severity of a wound can be difficult to determine even when a person isn't covered in body armor, which can hide the extent of injuries. It was often very hard to tell whether wounded clones were about to die or were capable of pulling through, especially those that had gotten hit by blaster bolts. We're going to dwell on that example for a bit here, because getting shot by a blaster really was a messy ordeal, and understanding that is a big part of understanding what the RIMSUs had to deal with on a daily basis. Blasters worked a lot differently than firearms work in our world, and they were more complicated than simple laser weaponry as well. Blasters fired blaster bolts, which is to say, concentrated packages of energized gas particles which dealt damage primarily through concussive force and the rapid transfer of kinetic energy. Essentially, when a blaster bolt hit a target, it caused a sudden rapid increase in heat and a massive transfer of kinetic energy. When a blaster bolt hit something like a concrete wall, this resulted in a small explosion and slightly deformed the point of contact, resulting in telltale blast points. But when a blaster bolt hit an organic target, the results were much messier. The bolts typically burned holes clean through organic targets, and what's more, the process of a bolt passing through organic tissue caused bodily fluids near the wounds to evaporate. As steam takes up more space than liquid, this meant that blood vessels and the like that happened to be near blaster wounds tended to explode as the bolt passed through, causing massive damage to any surrounding tissue. In short, they were quite uncivilized. This, for the record, is another reason why clone armor was so important. While it was impractical to mass-produce armor that outright deflected blaster bolts, the kind of armor produced for clones could at least absorb some of the energy from a blast, minimizing internal damage. Nonetheless, the damage caused by a blaster wound was often far worse than it looked on the surface. If an unarmored soldier were to be shot in the shoulder, for example, even a surface wound had the potential to annihilate the whole shoulder's worth of tissue. In the real world, even a glancing blaster bolt to the shoulder would probably cost a person their arm. Thankfully for the clones, the Republic's medical technology was ahead of ours, and so the RIMSUs were far better prepared to deal with blaster wounds in ways that didn't involve amputation. Like all organized fighting forces, the Republic dealt with its casualties in stages. As we've seen in Star Wars: The Clone Wars, clones like Jesse were trained as medics, who provided immediate relief to wounded clones. Typically, these clones were aided by IM-6 medical droids, one of which was kept with an emergency medkit in standard issue medical lockers. These lockers were featured on most large Republic vehicles. One was located beneath the cockpit in the nose section of the LAAT gunships, for example, and another was located in the aft section of ATTE walkers. Clone medics and IM-6 droids helped triage wounded clones, which was no easy task. As in the real world, the wounded were divided between those with small injuries, those with extensive wounds, and those that were pretty much already dead. Medics typically took care of the first category with a quick shot of Bacta or the application of bandages, while the third category were afforded what comfort could be spared as they took their final breaths. The second category, those with grievous injuries that had a chance of pulling through, were the cases that got sent to the Rimsus. Republic Mobile surgical units were basically divisions within the Grand Army of the Republic that set up field hospitals on crucial battlefields. The number of Rimsus assigned to any given battle varied depending on the severity of the conflict. On Drongar, the site of one of the bloodiest battles of the Clone Wars, there were a grand total of 15 Rimsus set up, and even then, they had more wounded on their hands than they were equipped to deal with. Rimsus were manned by a mix of clone medics and soldiers, medical droids, and conscripted personnel, which included trained surgeons and nurses. Their job, of course, was to save as many clone lives as possible and to make the clones whose lives they couldn't save a bit more comfortable as they died. Rimsus were typically hectic, as incoming cases could go from bad to worse quite quickly, and there were always more coming in. If you've seen MASH, it was basically a lot like that. In theory, Rimsus were capable of treating all but the most serious of injuries, but frequent supply shortages and the chaos of war meant that this wasn't always the case. For example, one of the most common dangers wounded clones faced was sepsis, which is a real-world side effect of infection in the body which has an extreme reaction to bacteria or certain chemicals, causing swelling and, in many cases, cascade organ failure. Due to how utterly blast bolts ravaged tissue, sepsis was a danger for a great many wounded clones. Now, Rimsus were equipped with anti-sepsis fields, energy umbrellas that effectively solved the problem by killing bacteria and neutralizing chemical agents, which meant that, in theory, sepsis shouldn't have been a problem in field hospitals. However, shortages of supplies and staff meant that there sometimes weren't enough fields, and doctors weren't always able to catch clones that needed them, meaning that sepsis deaths did indeed occur, and Rimsus staff had to work doubly hard to prevent them. Rimsus were equipped with other heavy-duty medical tech as well, especially Bacta. Bacta, as many of you know, was a chemical agent that rapidly regenerated tissue and thus was capable of healing a massive variety of wounds. Bacta patches were often applied to wounded clones as a means of stabilizing them, and Bacta tanks were frequently used for serious cases, though shortages often meant that serious cases had to be stabilized the good old-fashioned way. For the most extreme cases, Rimsus were even equipped with medical issue cloning tanks, which could generate organs for transplanting. But not every medical issue can be solved with technology. You can't just take a wounded clone, chuck him in a Bacta tank, and hope he comes out okay. Wounds needed to be treated in detail first, and that's where the surgical side of Republic Mobile surgical units came in. The most crucial part of these units were the surgeons, doctors recruited from across the Republic to serve on the front lines. These being stabilized serious injuries and patched up clones enough for the Bacta tanks to finish the job, and were thus essential in ensuring the survival of a good many clones. One of the most important assets for a Rimsu to have was a Jedi Healer. These weren't guaranteed to every unit, as Palpatine wanted Jedi on the front lines instead of doing their jobs. But no amount of Sith plotting could change the fact that the Jedi were natural healers, and as a result, many of them served with the Rimsus, proving essential in saving countless lives. A number of Jedi that were particularly skilled in healing practically worked full-time with the Rimsus, including Barriss Offee, who spent months with Rimsus 7 on Drongar. In fact, it's quite possible that the carnage Offee witnessed with the Rimsus on Drongar inspired her radicalization and fall to the dark side. So that was the story of the Republic Mobile surgical units, the unsung heroes of the Grand Army of the Republic. But what do you think? Would you like to hear more about this side of the Clone Wars? Make sure you let us know in the comment section below. And as usual guys, just before you go, make sure you check out all those links in the description below, including our main Geetsly's Discord server, where you can chat to myself and other Star Wars fans, and our Geetsly's gaming network, specifically our Gary's Mod servers, where you can roleplay on all of our different servers and play games with other Star Wars fans such as yourself. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.